So, in early 1982, a woman was admitted to a hospital in Elmira, New York. And, I mean, her condition was just staggering.
Yeah, it was truly horrific.
Right. She was down to like 82 pounds. She was suffering from this severely underactive thyroid gland. Rheumatoid arthritis had locked her joints to the point where she could barely hold a pen.
Let alone get out of a chair.
Exactly. And on top of that, she was experiencing this profound sudden hearing loss and had developed these deep infected bed sores.
Which is just a nightmare scenario.
It is. The physical reality of her days was just, it consisted of being physically hauled, dragged and lifted onto portable commodes by complete strangers. Her most private bodily functions were becoming public record for the nurses and orderlies on the ward.
Yeah, losing all that physical autonomy.
Right. And well, that alone is a harrowing medical reality. But the context here makes it one of the most profound paradoxes of the 20th century, because this patient was Jane Roberts.
Wow. Jane Roberts?
Yeah. The very woman who for the previous 2 decades had channeled and published this vast paradigm-shifting body of work known as the Seth material.
Which, of course, centers entirely on the premise that human beings create their own physical reality.
Exactly.
I mean, it is the ultimate crucible for a philosophy, isn't it?
It really is.
Because the very individual who delivered the message that, the body is a self-healing instrument and that we are absolutely not at the mercy of external events, she found herself trapped in a hospital bed.
Physically deteriorating in the most humiliating way imaginable.
Yeah. And yet, when we examine her husband Robert Betts's meticulous private notes from that 31-day hospitalization, we don't find a repudiation of the material.
We really don't.
No. Instead, we find this brutal, flawless, and deeply mechanical demonstration of exactly how our psychological structures, literally shape our flesh.
And that is exactly the mission of our deep dive today. We are pulling from this massive stack of sources today.
Yeah, it's a lot of material.
It is. We've got the nature of personal reality, the individual and the nature of mass events, the magical approach, dreams evolution and value fulfillment, and of course, those profoundly personal hospital notes.
All to unpack a thesis that will basically turn your understanding of the world inside out.
Literally. We're looking at the actual mechanics of how human consciousness generates physical matter. But I want to set the stage for you, the listener, regarding where this material actually comes from.
Right, the background is important.
Yeah. So starting in the 1960s, Jane Roberts would go into this dissociated trance state and speak for an entity that called itself Seth.
An energy personality essence.
Right, an essence no longer focused in physical reality.
Which, naturally brings up a pretty high threshold of skepticism for many people.
Oh, absolutely.
But regardless of whether you view Seth as a literal discarnate entity broadcasting from another dimension, or
if you just prefer to view him as a brilliant, autonomous expression of Jane Roberts' own deep, unconscious mind.
Exactly. The source of the material doesn't actually alter its rigorous utility.
It doesn't matter where it came from. The tools work.
Right. The psychological frameworks provided in these texts are not like vague New Age platitudes.
No, not at all.
They are precise, they are heavily interconnected, and they demand a really radical reevaluation of how you interact with your daily life.
So, to anchor this deep dive, we need to start with the foundational premise. In the nature of personal reality, Seth states this clearly. He says, the physical body is the material construction of the soul's idea of itself. You are not at the mercy of events. You are the events.
You are the events. That is such a heavy statement.
It is. And I want to bypass the standard ways people usually interpret, manifestation.
Yeah.
I want to look at the actual physics Seth is proposing here.
The mechanics of it.
Right. I think of it kind of like a movie theater.
Okay, I like this analogy.
So the physical reality you experience every day, the commute, the office, the literal aches in your physical body, that is the movie screen.
Just the flat canvas.
Exactly. And your conscious mind is the projector.
Okay.
But your core beliefs, your intense emotion, those deep-seated assumptions you have about life, that is the actual film reel running through the projector.
Right. And most people spend their entire lives frantically running up to the movie screen, scratching at the canvas, trying to force the picture to change.
Yes. They try to change the external event through sheer physical force.
Or willpower, which is, exhausting and usually completely futile.
It is. They just don't realize that if they want a different movie, they have to physically walk into the projection booth and swap out the film reel.
But the hurdle we immediately hit when we try to do that is what Seth calls naive realism.
Naive realism.
Yeah.
Unpack that.
Yeah. So We are deeply athletically conditioned by society to believe that the physical world exists entirely independently of us.
Like it's just a rigid backdrop.
Exactly. We think we just happen to be walking through it, bumping into pre-existing objects.
Just a tiny speck in a massive, indifferent universe.
Right. Naive realism is this fascinating philosophical trap because we rely entirely on our physical senses, so sight, touch, hearing, and we just assume they're reporting the objective truth of the universe.
Well, why wouldn't we? I mean, I hit my hand on the table, it hurts. It feels pretty objective.
Sure, it feels objective. But Seth argues that the physical senses are actually these highly specialized, highly restrictive tools. They're designed only to perceive a specific camouflage of reality.
A camouflage.
Yeah, they provide an incredibly flat view. If we look at the mechanics Seth describes, he basically posits that consciousness is the fundamental unit of the universe.
Not matter, consciousness.
Exactly. Everything we perceive as solid matter is, in actuality, a materialization of inner electromagnetic realities.
Okay, let's slow down right there and unpack that mechanism because that's huge. When you say an electromagnetic reality, what is actually happening when I have a single thought?
Okay, so according to this framework, every single thought you have and every single emotion you feel possesses an actual, literal electromagnetic mass.
Wait, really? Like physical mass?
Well, electromagnetic mass. It is not some ephemeral nothingness that just vanishes the moment it crosses your mind.
Sure.
It has a specific frequency and an invisible but very real structural integrity.
So building something.
Yes. And when your thoughts and feelings group together through the law of attraction, meaning similar frequencies naturally coalescing, they gather enough intensity to eventually punch through the threshold of invisibility.
And manifest as physical matter.
Or physical events. Your living room chair, the weather outside, it is all condensed consciousness.
Okay, if I accept that premise, that my thoughts are accumulating electromagnetic mass and projecting my physical reality, I immediately run into a massive psychological wall.
The big, why did I create this question?
Exactly. And I know you listening to this are likely hitting the very same wall. Because if I am the ultimate director of this movie, why would I ever consciously write a script where my bank account is overdrawn?
Right.
Or why would I write a script where my partner leaves me? Or where I develop a chronic, painful illness?
It feels like victim blaming.
It does. It feels incredibly counterintuitive to claim we are creating our reality when so much of it feels painful or just entirely unwanted.
And that is the ultimate pushback. Addressing it requires us to separate the fleeting, surface-level chatter of the conscious mind from our deeply embedded core beliefs.
The film reel versus just random dust on the lens.
That's a good way to put it. The conscious mind is a brilliant, totally necessary tool. It is meant to assess the physical world and direct our energy, but it is also the carrier of our beliefs.
Right.
And very often, the beliefs that are doing the actual heavy lifting of creation are completely invisible to us.
Invisible because we don't recognize them as beliefs at all. We recognize them as facts.
That is the crucial distinction. A core belief might be, life is a constant struggle, or my body is inherently frail, or wealth is inherently corrupting.
I know so many people who hold those exact beliefs.
Right. But if you hold one of those beliefs, you do not wake up in the morning and consciously say, I choose to believe life is a struggle today.
No, you wake up and say, ugh, life is hard. That's just how the world works.
Exactly. Because you classify it as an objective fact of reality, the belief remains totally hidden from your critical examination.
But the inner self, the part of us that actually generates the physical projection from the projection booth, it doesn't have a filtering mechanism to judge whether a belief is helpful or harmful, does it?
No, it doesn't judge at all. It just takes the belief as a literal command.
A literal blueprint.
Yes. The inner self possesses this inexhaustible creative energy.
Yeah.
And it is entirely neutral in its execution. It looks at the blueprint provided by the conscious mind.
So if the conscious mind's blueprint says, I am inherently unworthy of success,
then the inner self says, understood. Let me arrange the atoms, the circumstances, the electromagnetic probabilities to faithfully project a world of failure onto the physical screen.
wow. So the empty bank account is not a punishment at all.
Not at all. It is perfect, flawless physical feedback showing you the exact dimensions of the invisible belief you are currently holding.
It's just a mirror.
A literal physical mirror.
Okay, so if our core beliefs are the film reel, we need to really understand the architecture of the projection booth itself. Because I certainly don't consciously calculate the atomic structure of my coffee cup before I pick it up.
No, that would be impossible.
Right. The source material outlines a deeply complex architecture for this, dividing reality into what Seth calls Framework 1 and Framework 2.
Which is such a helpful model.
It is. And I want to build a scenario to explore this
Yeah.
rather than just, reading dry definitions. Let's say I am an entrepreneur trying to launch a new business.
Okay.
I'm writing emails, I'm scheduling meetings, I'm staring at my budget spreadsheet, and I am worrying about deadlines.
Yeah.
In that state, I am operating entirely in Framework 1.
Yes. Framework 1 is our daily physical theater. It is the world of linear time, so past, present, and future. It is governed by deductive logic, cause and effect, and physical action.
A causes B.
Right. When you are sweating over your budget spreadsheet trying to figure out where the money is going to come from, you are squarely in Framework 1.
But Seth suggests that trying to create a successful business solely by manipulating Framework 1 is basically like trying to move the ocean with a teaspoon.
It's totally exhausting because the real leverage is in Framework 2.
So what exactly is Framework 2?
Framework 2 is the vast, simultaneous inner psychological reality. It is the invisible medium in which Framework 1 exists and from which it draws all its vitality.
Seth refers to Framework 2 as the mental studio, right?
Yes, the mental studio. It's the dimension where all of your plans, your intents, your dreams, and even your biological blueprints actually reside and interact before they ever coalesce into physical events.
So the deductive logic I use in Framework 1, like, if I send this email, then maybe I will get this client. That is totally inadequate for the actual creation of reality.
Utterly inadequate because Framework 2 operates on associative logic.
Associative logic, meaning it connects things based on shared meaning or intent or resonance, regardless of physical distance or linear time.
Precisely. And the dependency of Framework 1 on Framework 2 is absolute. Seth points out a very humbling reality check here. You could not survive for a single afternoon relying solely on your Framework 1 conscious mind.
It's honestly a terrifying thought experiment. Just imagine if your conscious mind had to take over the manual operation of your physical body.
Just for lunch.
Right. You sit down to eat an apple. Now, consciously instruct your salivary glands to produce the exact right enzymes.
Consciously direct your stomach acid.
Yes. Consciously tell your cells to divide, your hair to grow, your immune system to identify a specific pathogen, and manufacture the corresponding antibodies.
If we had to use deductive Framework 1 logic to run our biology, we would drop dead of exhaustion in 30 seconds.
We really would.
But all of that incredibly complex, miraculous biological work is handled effortlessly in Framework 2. The conscious mind merely sets the intent. It decides to eat the apple.
And the inner self in Framework 2 handles the infinite associative calculations required to digest it, extract the nutrients, and turn it into physical energy.
Without you having to lift a mental finger.
But the leap Seth makes, and this is where the material becomes super radical, is that Framework 2 does not just handle our internal biology.
No, it handles our external events, too.
It is an infinite information service, computing probabilities with blinding speed. Which brings us to this whole concept of synchronicity.
Oh, this is the best part.
So if I am in a foreign country, right, walking through a crowded market, and I bump into an old friend I haven't seen in 2 decades, my Framework 1 mind categorizes that as a bizarre, random coincidence. What are the odds?
But from the perspective of Framework 2, there is absolutely no such thing as a chance encounter.
Not at all.
In the mental studio, the associative intents of both individuals were known. The calculations were made simultaneously.
So my intent to maybe feel nostalgic, or their intent to reconnect.
Exactly. The micro decisions, like you deciding to stop and look at a scarf for 10 seconds, your friend deciding to take a slightly different route through the market, all of that was subtly coordinated and communicated in Framework 2.
Orchestrated with mathematical precision.
Yes, because the intersection of your paths served the psychological growth or the value fulfillment of both parties at that exact moment.
So practically speaking, if Framework 2 is this omnipotent stage crew working behind the curtains, how are we supposed to actually interact with it?
Well, Seth offers a very specific technique for reality creation, but I'll warn you, it directly contradicts everything our culture teaches us about hustling and forcing outcomes.
Which is why it's so hard to do. It requires a complete reversal of our normal approach.
It really does. In Framework 1, when we want something, we obsess over the how. We worry, we plan obsessively, we try to force the physical pieces into place.
We try to micromanage the universe.
Yes. But Seth says you must identify your desire in Framework 1. Say you want a new job, a healed relationship, a creative breakthrough, and you dwell upon it consciously to bring it to the forefront of your probabilities. You define the what.
Okay, I define the what, but then what?
Then you must take the desire and drop it like a pebble into the vast waters of Framework 2.
You drop it and you walk away.
You forget about it for a fortnight. You literally, deliberately take your hands off the steering wheel.
That sounds terrifying to my Framework 1 mind.
Of course it does, because you feel out of control. But you must allow the associative spontaneous logic of Framework 2 to arrange the details. You have to trust that the inner self has access to infinite probabilities, connections, and people that your conscious mind could never possibly deduce.
And when you try to micromanage the how in Framework 1,
You are effectively introducing anxiety and doubt into the film reel, which Framework 2 then dutifully materializes as more obstacles.
because it's projecting your fear of it not working.
Exactly.
Okay, this brings up a really critical question about motivation. If Framework 2 is this incredible, tireless engine, constantly computing probabilities and manifesting reality, what is the fuel?
What's driving it all?
Right. Why does the universe bother to keep expanding, keep creating, keep experiencing?
Well, if we look to standard biological science, the foundational metric we are given is Darwinian evolution, survival of the fittest.
Basically, the prime driver of life is the desperate urge to not die.
Exactly. It's the drive to pass on genetic material in competitive, resource-scarce, and often very hostile environment.
But Seth introduces a totally different metric. He calls it value fulfillment. And honestly, understanding this concept requires dismantling a lot of what we learned in biology class.
It really does. Value fulfillment is perhaps the most beautiful and structurally profound concept in the entire Seth material. It is the innate, rambunctious, joyful drive within every single unit of consciousness to seek its highest qualitative potential.
Joyful being the operative word there. And when Seth says every single unit of consciousness, he is not being metaphorical, and he is not just talking about human beings.
Not at all. Seth argues that consciousness is not a byproduct of a complex physical brain. Rather, the brain is a byproduct of consciousness.
Wow.
There is consciousness within a star, within a human, within a blade of grass, within a virus, and within a microscopic cell.
And every single one of those units is propelled by value fulfillment.
Yes. It is the desire to express excellence. And importantly, it is not the desire for perfection, because perfection implies a static, finished endpoint where no further growth is possible.
Right, perfection is basically death.
Exactly. Value fulfillment is the desire for continuous, excellent unfolding.
The sources use this analogy of a natural landscape, and I want to expand on that to really visualize value fulfillment. Think of an apple tree in a forest.
Okay, an apple tree.
An apple tree operating under value fulfillment does not look at a violet growing nearby and feel insecure about its lack of purple petals.
No, it doesn't care about the violet's petals.
It doesn't look at a massive oak tree and feel inferior about its height either. It perfectly, effortlessly, and joyfully fulfills its own unique value as an apple tree.
Just by existing as itself.
Exactly. And here is the crucial part. In doing so, it provides oxygen to the air, it provides shade to the soil, it drops leaves that compost into nutrients for the fungi, and it provides fruit for the deer. It fulfills its own unique value, and by the very nature of that fulfillment, it effortlessly adds to the value fulfillment of the entire ecosystem.
That interconnectedness is the defining characteristic of value fulfillment. It means that each organism spontaneously seeks conditions suited to its own fulfillment in such a way that its development furthers the creative potentials of everything else.
It's a fundamentally cooperative universe.
Not a purely competitive one. Even at a microscopic level, the trillions of cells in your body are cooperating right now. They are working together to keep you alive so that they can experience their own cellular value fulfillment through your broader macroscopic experience of the world.
Which completely challenges the societal conditioning we receive from the moment we are born.
Oh, completely.
We are deeply steeped in the concept of inherent flaw, whether it's the religious concept of original sin or the more secular economic concept that human beings are naturally greedy, selfish, and predatory. We are taught that our core nature is dangerous.
That we're basically bad animals.
Right. We are taught that we need strict laws, artificial guilt, and rigid societal structures to police ourselves, otherwise we will just destroy each other.
But Seth states emphatically that this premise is entirely backwards. He argues that the universe is of good intent. You are born with an inbuilt recognition of your own goodness.
You are born naturally loving, compassionate, cooperative, and fiercely curious.
And the energy that makes up the universe, the electromagnetic vitality that forms your very thoughts, is, at its fundamental basis, love.
That is a staggering paradigm shift. to truly internalize the belief that the universe leans in your direction. But, I mean, let's be real. If we look at human history or just read the morning news, it doesn't really look like a cooperative universe of good intent.
No, it often looks terrible. But Seth explains why that is. When a society adopts the core belief that human nature is evil or deeply flawed, it builds its governments, its educational systems, and its penal systems based on that premise of fear and restriction.
Right.
And those structures then generate the exact hostility and greed they were designed to prevent.
It's a self-fulfilling physical projection of a limiting core belief on a mass scale.
Exactly. But true natural law is simply the joyous, unhindered expansion of value fulfillment.
So, if the universe fundamentally leans in our direction, and the primary drive is this joyous value fulfillment, how does this actually play out in our physical flesh?
The physical body.
Yeah. In the sources, Seth describes the physical body as our most intimate work of art. He calls it a living sculpture. Your soul is not somehow trapped inside a meat suit. Your soul is constantly, moment by moment, creating your flesh from the inside out.
Which brings us to the concept of natural grace. Seth states that every living creature is born into a state of grace. We share it with the animals, the plants, the weather systems.
You cannot fall out of the state of grace.
Never. It cannot be taken away from you by any external authority. You don't need a priest to confer it upon you, and you don't have to earn it through suffering or hard work. It is your natural biological heritage.
However, while you cannot actually lose your state of grace, the texts make it very clear that your conscious beliefs can absolutely blind you to it.
You can put up a wall.
A massive wall. You can build a psychological wall so thick that you feel completely severed from that grace. And that feeling of severance brings us to a really uncomfortable topic. Guilt.
Oh, guilt, the big one.
The sources differentiate deeply between natural guilt and what we experience as artificial guilt.
Yeah, when we hear the word guilt, we immediately think of shame. We think of punishing ourselves, of lying awake at night, cataloging our flaws, hating ourselves.
But Seth defines natural guilt as something entirely different. It is simply a biological compass. It is the innate cellular knowing of the rule, thou shalt not violate.
It's a preventative signal, right? Not a life sentence.
Exactly. Think of an animal in the wild. If an animal violates its own natural instincts or its relationship to the environment, it feels a brief, sharp sense of physical wrongness.
It immediately corrects its behavior and it moves on.
It doesn't sit around in a cave for 10 years loathing itself, feeling unworthy of eating or mating.
Right. Natural guilt is meant to be a momentary course correction mechanism, just a quick beep on the dashboard.
But humans, with our highly developed conscious minds and our ability to obsessively reflect on the past and project into the future, we have severely twisted this compass.
We have completely distorted it. We have twisted natural guilt into artificial, manufactured guilt.
We feel guilty for everything.
Everything. We feel guilty for our natural sexual impulses. We feel guilty for resting. We feel guilty for literally just existing. We feel guilty for having thoughts that don't align with arbitrary societal standards.
And this artificial guilt encases us. It acts as a massive block, completely cutting us off from feeling our own biological elegance and stopping the natural flow of value fulfillment.
Which forces us to ask the most visceral, difficult question about the physical body: health.
Yeah. Because if we are inherently in a state of grace, if our bodies are miraculously managed by Framework 2, and if we are driven by value fulfillment, why do we get sick?
It's the most common question.
Why do we develop chronic pain, autoimmune diseases, or cancer?
Well, the framework provides a very challenging but ultimately empowering answer. Seth is very clear. Illness is not a punishment from God.
It's not karma.
No, it is not a punishment from a judgmental universe. And it is not just random, meaningless bad luck. Illness is a byproduct of the learning process. It is, quite literally, misdirected creative energy.
Okay, explain the mechanics of that. How does creative energy, which is joyful, become a tumor or arthritis?
Okay, so remember that the inner self possesses inexhaustible energy that is always moving toward expression. It has to flow. If your conscious mind holds a rigid, limiting belief, let's say a massive amount of artificial guilt, or a deep, unyielding belief in your own unworthiness, that belief acts as a dam.
It blocks the river.
It completely blocks the natural flow of value fulfillment, but the energy cannot just vanish. It has to go somewhere. The inner self, attempting to correct this massive imbalance, will try to communicate with the conscious mind.
Like through dreams or impulses.
Yes. But if the conscious mind refuses to listen, refuses to change the belief, The inner self will eventually bypass the conscious mind and materialize the psychological block physically.
So the body literally creates a physical malady to force the conscious mind to face the limiting belief.
Exactly. The body is constantly attempting to self-correct. The illness is a dramatic physical manifestation of an inner psychological conflict.
It's an alarm bell.
It is the body saying, "Look at this. You have dammed up your energy and you must address this block." It is an extreme attempt by the organism to find a new path to value fulfillment when the normal, joyful paths have been choked off by negative beliefs.
And that brings us right back to the harrowing scenario we opened with, the hospital room.
Jane's crucible.
Yes. It is one thing for us to sit here and discuss illness as misdirected creative energy in a philosophical vacuum. It sounds elegant on paper.
It makes sense intellectually.
Right. But what happens when the theory meets brutal physical reality? What happens when Jane Roberts, the very woman channeling this profound material, faces a severe, terrifying physical breakdown?
This is where the source material transitions from esoteric theory into intensely personal, highly vulnerable reality. When we look at the notes Robert F. Butts took during Jane's hospitalization in 1982.
The contrast is just breathtaking. The woman delivering the message that you create your own reality was trapped in a hospital bed, physically deteriorating. She had to rely on nurses to empty her bedpan.
Yeah.
For someone who believes so deeply in the sovereignty of the individual and the supreme power of the soul, this loss of physical autonomy must have been a terrifying, humiliating confrontation with her own creation.
So we have to ask the mechanical question. If she created this, what was the invisible core belief that led to this extreme physical crisis?
What was the dam blocking her energy?
Well, Seth actually provides a diagnosis of Jane's condition from the perspective of Framework 2, and it is a masterclass in understanding how our psychological structures literally shape our flesh.
Seth explained that over the years, Jane had developed what he called a super-perfect, superhuman self-image.
Yes, he referred to it as her sinful self. Now, it is critical to understand he did not mean she was sinning in a religious or moral sense.
Right. No moral judgment.
He meant she had developed an unyielding, rigid, subconscious belief that she had to be perfect. As the conduit for this massive philosophical material, she felt an overwhelming, crushing responsibility to solve everyone else's problems.
She received thousands of letters, didn't she?
Thousands, from people begging for help, and she felt she had to answer every single one of them. She felt that her spontaneous, natural, flawed human self was unacceptable and needed to be tightly controlled to protect the integrity of the work.
Seth said this superhuman image demanded so much of her that it literally encased her body as if in concrete.
Her conscious beliefs were subjecting her to impossible pressure. She believed she had to constantly produce, constantly be the flawless spiritual channel, constantly sacrifice her own relaxation for others.
And doing that completely blocked her natural, joyful value fulfillment.
So what did her inner self do? It created a profound physical crisis.
The illness was the creative solution.
Precisely. Seth explains that Jane's entity utilized the hospital experience to utterly shatter that rigid, superhuman image. That super-perfect self-image simply could not survive the humiliation of being lifted onto a portable commode by strangers.
It broke the concrete.
The illness forcibly dismantled her casing. It forced her to become what Seth called a supplicative self.
She had to learn how to ask for help. She had to experience the vulnerability of simple human fellowship. She had to realize on a visceral, physical level that she didn't have to be a flawless spiritual superhero to be worthy of existing and being cared for.
Furthermore, Seth explained the specific mechanics of her physical symptoms, which is fascinating. Look at her thyroid shutdown.
The thyroid regulates metabolism, right? The body's speed.
Exactly. Seth explained that the severe underactive thyroid was her body's literal reaction to her subconscious belief that she was moving too fast with her psychic abilities.
She felt overwhelmed.
She felt overwhelmed by the demands being placed upon her, and she believed she needed to be physically restrained.
So her body took the psychological instruction entirely literally. It said, oh, you think you're going too fast and it's dangerous. You feel overwhelmed by the pressure to produce. Okay, I will shut down the thyroid gland, lock your joints with arthritis, and bring you to a complete grinding halt.
Yes. The body was actually protecting her based on the deeply flawed beliefs she was feeding into the projector.
Wow.
The takeaway here is profound for anyone listening. Even the most advanced minds, people who intellectually understand these concepts inside and out, can get trapped by their invisible beliefs.
Jane's physical breakdown wasn't a failure or a disproving of the Seth material.
Not at all. It was a brutal, flawless demonstration of it in action. Her body was desperately trying to find a new path to value fulfillment when her conscious beliefs had backed her into a psychological corner.
That is heavy, and it demands a lot of introspection, but it's also incredibly liberating when you really think about it.
How so?
Because if the body created the illness as a biological solution to a psychological block, it means the body retains the power to reverse the illness once the block is removed.
Yes. The mechanism works in both directions.
Which brings us to the new framework Seth offered Jane as she navigated her recovery, to basically prevent her from falling back into that concrete trap of overproduction. He called it the magical approach.
The magical approach. This ties directly into our relationship with time, productivity, and how we allow Framework 2 to actually operate,
To understand it, we have to look at what Seth calls assembly line time.
which is the absolute dominant mode of our modern culture.
It is everywhere. It is the belief that time is a linear conveyor belt, and every single minute must be utilized for tangible, measurable production. If you are not producing a widget, writing a page, earning a dollar, or optimizing your workflow, you are wasting time. You are failing.
Jane felt this pressure immensely. She felt she constantly had to produce books, answer mountains of fan mail, and justify her existence through her output.
She turned her incredible, joyful creativity into a grueling Framework 1 chore.
And doing that completely chokes off the associative logic of Framework 2. Seth contrasts assembly line time with the natural person. The natural person operates in natural time.
Okay, so how does natural time actually differ from assembly line time?
Natural time is not strictly linear or commodified. It turns inward, outward, backward, and forward. The natural person knows how to draw profound creative insight from seemingly unproductive moments.
Like just resting or taking a walk?
Yeah, doing household chores or simply staring out a window. The natural person strongly resents meaningless constraints and rigid schedules because they implicitly understand that true inspiration and the massive calculations of Framework 2 do not punch a time clock.
I want to read a quote from Seth here that fundamentally rewired how I view work. He says, "Spontaneity and discipline are not opposites. True discipline is the result of true spontaneity."
That is such a huge shift. We are heavily conditioned to view discipline as a form of self-punishment.
We really are. We think of discipline as forcing ourselves to do something we don't want to do, setting an alarm for 5 a.m., grinding it out, white-knuckling our way to a goal through sheer willpower.
Right, forcing outcomes in Framework 1.
But Seth is saying that if you actually align with your natural impulses, if you trust the spontaneous flow of your own value fulfillment, the discipline will happen automatically.
The apple tree doesn't need discipline to grow apples. It grows them spontaneously because it is aligned with its nature.
When we try to micromanage every minute in Framework 1 out of fear and the desperate need to produce, we introduce massive resistance.
We block the effortless, miraculous flow of Framework 2.
Jane used to sit at her typewriter for hours, staring at a blank page, trying to force the words out because it was designated work time.
And Seth told her to stop.
Yes. He told her to get up from the desk, go for a walk, read a novel, take a nap. He told her to let her spontaneous self take over. And when she stopped forcing it, when she let Framework 2 do the heavy lifting in the background, the insights just poured out of her effortlessly later on.
The conscious mind's job is not to figure out the how. The conscious mind's job is to define the what and then strictly get out of the way.
So as we synthesize this massive journey we've just been on today, let's tie these mechanics together. You are the projector. Physical reality, with all its joys and its terrors, is the screen.
Your conscious mind is a brilliant, powerful tool, but it is only meant to direct your focus and define your desires.
The vast, loving, infinitely calculating engine of Framework 2 handles the actual manifestation, orchestrating synchronicities and biological miracles through associative logic.
And the key to allowing that engine to work for you rather than against you is identifying and shedding those invisible, limiting core beliefs.
The beliefs that say life is a struggle,
Or that you aren't worthy of health.
or that your spontaneous nature is somehow flawed. By trusting your innate drive for value fulfillment, you can finally drop your artificial guilt. You can step back into that natural state of grace you were born into. You can stop fighting the universe, because you realize you are the universe, expressing itself through the medium of your unique, individual consciousness.
I want to ask you, yes, you listening to this right now, to examine your own life through this lens. Think about one specific area where you are exhausted, where you're furiously scratching at the movie screen, trying to force a result using only Framework 1 logic.
Maybe it's a project at work that isn't moving.
Or maybe it's a fractured relationship or a persistent health issue. Can you identify the core belief running the film? And more importantly, can you take your hands off the wheel? Just for a little while.
Just drop it.
Can you take that desire, that goal, define it clearly, and then consciously drop it like a pebble into the vast waters of Framework 2? Can you forget about it for a fortnight, stop obsessing over the how, and just allow your natural, spontaneous impulses to guide your very next step? And as you consider how to apply that in your own life, I want to leave you with one final, deeply provocative thought from the source material. Seth tells us that every single idea, every fleeting thought, and every intense emotion you experience is an actual, literal electromagnetic reality.
It has actual mass.
It has mass, albeit imperceptible to our physical instruments. It does not simply disappear into the ether when you stop thinking it. It moves outward. It joins with similar thoughts and emotions in the atmosphere, grouping together through the law of attraction to literally shape the psychological and physical events of our shared world.
So the literal weather patterns, the political climate, the mass events of our time.
They are all the accumulated physical materialization of our private, invisible thoughts. Knowing that your internal landscape doesn't stay internal, knowing that your private, quiet mind is the literal raw material that becomes our shared physical reality. What kind of universe are you going to build with the very next thought that crosses your mind?